Okay, so what I would like to do is give you an overview of opening SPSS and getting a feel for what the data set looks like, and then to begin to do the descriptive analysis with the variables in that data set, such as what you need to do for the assignment that is posted this week and will be due 1 week from today on Sunday, the 23rd. And so here, what you can see is the SPSS screen that is open. This is the default image that you see when you open the Quit and Win dataset that's posted in the module section of our Canvas site. When you open that using SPSS, you will see this kind of a grid. It kind of looks like an Excel file if you've used that before. And what you see across the top are the variables in the dataset, starting with the treatment variable, and then continuing, you can move the little slider on the bottom. You can move that to be able to see the variables that are to the right that aren't immediately observable when you first open the data set. So the variables go across the top. Those are the columns. And then the rows are actually individual participants who completed this study. So there are 819 individuals. If you scroll down using the slider on the right hand side, you can see that it goes from 1 at what we saw at the beginning down to 819. So each one of those rows is a person that participated in the Quit and Win study. And so that's basically what the data set looks like. This is the data view. There's a tab that's on the bottom left that is data view. And then if you switch it to variable view by clicking on it, there's a list of all 21 variables that are in the data set. I will point out that there's a column here that's called measure, and in most cases the level of measurement agrees with what's listed here. That's not necessarily true though, and I bring this up because probably in this first written assignment, one of the key challenges is to make sure that you use the right type of descriptive analysis that fits the type of variable you have. And I'll talk about that more in a second. So for example, the treatment variable is nominal, gender is nominal, marital status is nominal. These are all nominal because there's not an inherent order to the variable. So these are correctly tabbed by or correctly identified as nominal variables by SPSS. Education is ordinal. That's true. The typical number of cigarettes also ordinal. If they've ever quit using cigarettes, that's a yes/no variable, so again, nominal, and so on. And I can go all the way down. When you get to scale measurements, these are the things that we talk about as continuous, and kind of for the purposes of SPSS, they use scale and continuous interchangeably. Yeah. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the variables. Another thing to point out here is that you can look under the values column to get an idea of how these are coded. So for example, the treatment variable takes the value of 0 if it's a control participant and 1 if they were in the treatment group, and so on. You can and then close that out with the X. You can click, gender has 1 is female, 2 is male, and so on. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this gives you an idea of how you can sort of start to look at the variables to understand how they're coded, what the variable names are, and so on. And you will notice that when I ask you to do this first written assignment, it's called written assignment 2 actually, because it's the second assignment that you will have had in the course after the discussion board assignment from the week that's just ending. I have specific variable names, and you'll want to make sure that you use those variable names. For example, education is in here a few different ways actually. There's the original coding that was used when the data were collected, and this varies between 1 and 8 on the coding. That variable is called simply education. That's the 4th variable that's there. But if you look farther down, there's another variable that I created that was called HS education. That's an indicator variable for whether they have a high school diploma or not. So if the person has a high school or GED at least, then they would have a 1 for this and a 0 otherwise. So make sure when you look at the assignment that you're using the right variable as it's listed in the assignment. And then let me go back to get a little bit more into how we actually would do some data analysis. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to summarize the variable age. Age is the 12th variable in this variable view. And age, as we know, is a continuous variable. It's continuous because in this study it can take any value between 18 and I think 45. No, I'm sorry, I take that back. 18 is the minimum age, but there was no maximum age for this particular study. So it's a continuous variable. It can take every possible value between 18 and the oldest person who agreed to participate. And so because it's a continuous variable, we would analyze this using, or we would analyze this descriptively. We would summarize the variable using mean and standard deviation. So this is how you would get that information. If you look at the drop-down menu for Analyze, and then under Descriptive Statistics, one of the choices is Descriptives. And then you can flip through the list of variables. I'm just going to choose age for right now and put it here, and then say, and I can check and see what my options are. It's going to give me my mean and standard deviation. That's really what I'm most interested in, but also for the purposes of making a table, you might also want to look at the minimum and maximum. Those should be the default values though, so you should just get that even without having to click on that. So I say, okay, that sounds fine. And then this is what comes up in just a second. Okay, so this is telling us that for the quit and win data set, for the 818 participants who included their age, the minimum age was 18 as we expected, and the maximum age is 81. And on average, they were 40.5 years old with a standard deviation of 13.0. So if you were going to put this into your, put a table like this into your, well, I'll talk a little bit more about tables in a different video. So we'll leave this for now. But let's say that you go back and you say, okay, well, I want to see some descriptive analysis on the variable, which is an indicator for whether the person has ever tried to quit smoking. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to, this is my output file, yeah. I'm going to go back to Analyze and look at Descriptive Statistics again. Now, since the variable that's called EverQuitSig is a nominal variable, it has only 2 levels, so it has to be nominal. Since it's nominal, I don't want that descriptives anymore because that has mean and standard deviation, and that wouldn't be appropriate for a nominal variable. I would use frequencies instead. So I'm going to choose frequencies and go through, have you ever tried to quit is the variable that I want. And then just say OK. So it's just going to add this. What SPSS does, if you haven't used it before, it will just add this to what was already there. So this is just your output file, and it will put it in there. And I will show you in a little bit how you can copy that into a Word document. So with this particular variable, there were 18 people who did not answer this question, but 801 did. And this is just, again, the question, have you ever tried to quit smoking? And you can see from this output, oops, I moved up too far. You can see from this output that of the 801 who responded, 737 said yes, they have tried to quit at some point, and 64 said no. And then when you summarize this in a table or include that, what I always do is just include the valid percent. And basically the difference between the valid percent and percent is that the valid percent just basically says the 18 people that are missing for this, we're just going to put them aside for now, and we're not going to include them in that, rather than creating another category which is missing. And we'll just assume that if somebody is not listed in the frequencies, you know, they're not in the 64 and not in the 737, that means they were missing for this question. And so the valid percent, you'll notice, adds up to 100, whereas the raw percent adds up to 97.8 because 2.2 of the 819 were missing. So you're basically, the challenge of this assignment is to first, I shouldn't say the challenge, but I mean the first order of business is there are a list of several variables that you need to analyze descriptively using either mean and standard deviation with range or a frequency distribution. So the first order of business is to figure out for each of the variables that I have to analyze this way, which of those two options should I choose? And that's going to be driven by, is the variable a continuous variable or is it a nominal variable? And then categorical variables, you would tend in descriptive analysis, categorical variables that don't have very many categories, like stage of change and stage of change for sure, but even education and income. It oftentimes makes more sense to treat that as a nominal variable for the purpose of descriptive analysis and use a frequency distribution for those variables because it's usually more interesting and intuitive to be able to see, for example, the different levels of education rather than saying the average education is a 3.2 on a scale from 1 to 8 or whatever. It's oftentimes more interesting to be able to see what percent had, less than high school education, what percent had whatever the next category is. So frequency distributions would tend to be used even for ordinal variables, and you would save the mean and standard deviation analysis to use when you have continuous variables. Okay, so once you've done all that, and I should also point out that when you are when you go to analyze and you choose descriptive statistics and you're doing frequency distributions, for my little example, just to show you, I just included one variable in there. But if you said, oh, I also want to know about gender, and I also want to know about marital status, you can put any number of variables in here, and that's fine. Now, if you said, oh, I know in this descriptive analysis assignment, I need to do something with PIQ positive, so I'm going to stick that in there. That's a big no-no because we're doing frequencies here, and you're going to see that when you put this in here, it's going to list every possible the frequency and percentage with every possible value of PIQ positive, because this is not the appropriate way to analyze a continuous variable using frequencies. So you can put all of these in here, and it will print out frequency tables for each of those. Now, when it comes time to put these into a Word document, I'm just going to create a new Word document here. Hopefully my computer will comply with this in a timely way. I might have to do a separate video for that. I think I'll do a separate video for that. So I'm just going to go back to here. So, all right. So now you're ready to, well, I'll do that. Yeah. So this is basically how you get about getting into the data set, looking around and seeing what the variables are, checking carefully to make sure that you're looking at a variable that has the right name. And just to point out that there are several versions of the education variable depending on how many categories are combined together or not. So getting a chance to look and see what the variables are and doing the descriptive analysis that you need to do for the written assignment that's due a week from today. And I will post one more video in just a second that will talk about getting from the SPSS output into a Word document, and also making a table, because someone had asked about that, how to make a table in Word or edit a table in Word. So the second video is going to cover that. So I'll be back to do that in just a second.